His transactional experience spans 14 different countries. In Hong Kong, Russell led Skate and ARP's pro bono work on behalf of the Hong Kong Refugee Advice Center, which represented individuals facing persecution in their application for asylum, which were submitted to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. That's a pretty impressive range of experiences, which is fantastic. So Russell, why don't you give us a summary of why, with all that background, you decided to partner with Henry and get involved in this Sovereign's Capital event?
Sure, thanks. So I worked in law for 10 years in London and Hong Kong, and the FIFA is FIFA.
Thank you.
The world. It's hard when you're reading it live, kind of step back. The world governing body of football. That was kind of pre the more recent excitement with bribery and scandal. And did very, very interesting work. The FIFA deal was actually the first deal ever to pass on the risk of terrorism to the financial markets. So as an example for FIFA, they take all of the funds from the advertisers several years ahead of the World Cup. And what happened after 9/11 was that the insurance to cover if the World Cup, God forbid there was a bomb and they would have to return all of the advertising down payments, which had already been spent, the insurance went through the roof. So they issued a bond, so they passed on the financial risk of terrorism to the markets, basically. So a lot of really interesting work, but after 10 years, I didn't feel the law is a very tough business if you're not built to be a lawyer, and so, or not to do kind of big law all the time. So the elements of thinking about strategic thinking, because I had an MBA as well, the elements of kind of creativity, the elements of leadership, it's very hard to exercise those things. I took some time. At different times I had prayed and fasted, not kind of every day, but from time to time. And it was the one time when I fasted, I literally felt a push in my back to leave. And I said, oh, that's kind of funny. So I waited another couple months. And I did the same thing again, and I literally felt a push at my back to leave. And I hadn't ever felt anything like that. So I said, okay, let's just leave. And I left, I quit without having another job, but knowing I wanted to do something that involved more strategy and more purpose. And my mom, the markets were still down, so I left in 2007. You can't get, it's going to be hard for you to get a job in America. I said, it's okay, I'll figure it out. And then through some, fateful or God-driven connections, a friend in Hong Kong introduced me to Luke. Luke and Henry are co-founders of Sovereign's Capital. So Luke really doesn't like when I joke that I met Sovereign's Capital on my honeymoon, but that is actually true. So I was in Malaysia, and Luke was living in Malaysia at the time, and then he moved to Indonesia and then back to the States. And so he kindly drove way out of the city, and we had a coffee, and it was through a friend in Hong Kong that we connected. And I loved what Sovereigns was doing. And it's been very interesting. And Henry wouldn't say this either, obviously from his talk. I don't think we're all cut out to only work around Christians, but just the Sovereigns team is Christian because of the model that we do. And it's been a real blessing to have that reset, in my life. That's been really amazing. And I think, and this kind of story, Paul gave the example of his, the head of Regents College saying, you're going to succeed here. I think I've said this in front of Henry before, but for the audience. So one of the times, I go on a cruise sometimes over the summer with my wife and her parents, and she's Hispanic, so she loves the family time. And we were going on a cruise, and we were on our weekly kind of call, and Henry said, I'm so fired up for you. I'm fired up for you to go on holiday and spend time with your family and spend time with your in-laws. And I kind of didn't know what to say, because when you work in a law firm of 2,000 people, there's not a lot of times that the boss is like, I'm really fired up for you to go on holiday. And it's a blessing to have that kind of within the team. It's really special.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Yeah, thank you. Henry, that makes me want to turn to you and ask you a little bit more about Sovereign's Capital in terms of vision and desire and what was kind of driving you to set up that kind of venture investment firm and then partner with people like Russell. How would you describe that?
So much of the origination for Sovereigns came from a belief, of course, that transformation can happen in the marketplace. And we'd seen that God had clearly worked through bandwidth. We saw that people in the workplace were coming to know the Lord through chaplaincy, and that when that business can really succeed. So, entrepreneurs are the new cultural change agents. You used to have to be a baseball player or a rock star to be able to really impact culture. But because of the social network and the Foursquare guys showing up in Gap ads, now an entrepreneur really has an opportunity to really impact culture. And one of the things we'd come to see, and this isn't just in Silicon Valley, but it's really worldwide, is that so many entrepreneurs we knew were reluctant to talk about why they did what they did and their faith out of fear of some level of persecution, particularly those that want to get investment capital. They thought, you know what, I don't want to talk about my faith. I don't want to come across as exclusive or offensive or ignorant or naive, all things that are bad to be in Silicon Valley or in LA or any place. And so our hope was that we might be able to be a presence so that somebody could say, you know what, I can be a Christ follower. Now, to be clear, and this is really important to us, if a young entrepreneur comes to us and says, okay, here's my business, and here's how we want to compete and win and succeed. And we give them a term sheet. And Battery or Sequoia US Venture Partners also gives them a term sheet. Question is, can I be a faith-driven business? Looking to bear witness for why I do what I do, looking to love on my neighbor and looking to partners, customers, employees. Can I do that faithfully if I take money in from Battery or Sequoia? Or do I need to take money from Sovereigns? The answer is, of course they can be faithful and take money from Battery or Sequoia. We want to have that type of dialogue, and that to be a dialogue in culture, where somebody says, I don't need to take money from Sovereigns. And maybe they do, maybe they like some part of the operating background that Luke or I have, or some of the ways that we think about Asia or something like that, and we want to have a great portfolio too. But we wanted to say, out of 4,000 venture capital funds out there, probably needs to be one that sees faith as a strength. And so that's why we got it started.
Yeah, that's great. Of the ones that you've been involved in, that you see making progress, those kind of companies you've been investing in, what would be an example or two of innovations that Christian faith-based leaders you've seen come out of those kind of companies?
So I'll take two very, very quickly, because Russell works very directly with a number of our portfolios. Well, I want you to fill it out. But two, one's been in the news recently. Anthony Tan leads Grab. Grab just acquired Uber in Asia, and is now the largest ride-sharing platform. 3 million drivers in Asia. He's very serious about his Christian faith. TechCrunch asked him, it's like, how are you so successful? And he credits his faith in God and his drive to be able to make conditions better for people who are having part-time employment in Asia. So that's absolutely the type of story, and we're fortunate enough to get in early on that. Another one is Mark Sears at Cloud Factory. Came out of Sun Microsystems, and he capitalized on this movement of the working poor having access to the internet and computing power. Yeah. And so he's created job opportunities for thousands and thousands of workers in Nepal and Kenya by doing atomized labor, really picking up where Mechanical Turk laid off, and they are booming. The business is going really, really well. So those are two examples. Wow. But Russell works directly with a couple too.
Sure, I'll mention one I work really closely with and another one that's in the portfolio. One that I think is very neat is called Trustify. It's in essence kind of matching, if you need private detective services, you can find a private detective that's trusted. And when people think that, Jen Mellon, who's a female CEO of a tech company, not that common, she said when people hear what they do, they think it's only about affairs, right? Kind of spying on your partner. But a couple of comments on that. It's neat because it's a female CEO of a tech company. In general, evil prospers in the dark. And when you shine light, whatever it is, that's a good thing from a Christian perspective. And there's a need for truth in a lot of different areas, right? So it could be insurance fraud, right? Everyone complains about the price of health insurance. Part of that is driven by insurance fraud, right? So detectives are used in that, right? So just that is an example of a non-explicitly Christian business, but that shines light in the same way that journalism at its best will shine light into dark corners.
Yeah.
Another company that I work very closely with is called Shot Tracker. So Magic Johnson's an investor in that. They basically put a chip in a basketball so that the five of us could play basketball, whatever that would look like. Hopefully we wouldn't be playing another team that was very good. But that's for all of us because I have old basketball injuries too. But and you would see the stats live. You could see the stats live. And there's an inevitable challenge there because when you think stats, some of it's neat for coaching. Some of it's neat for maybe a kid on the farm or in the inner city that's not otherwise seen that he could show his stats to recruiters and get to college.
Yeah.
But there's also the other people who really like stats are the gambling houses, right? Because they make, so, this kind of redemption can be messy. And so that's just to highlight, it's not always so clear cut.
Right.
And then, but also this is there is a CEO, but they're basically co-founders. One is African American from Trinidad, and one is white, right? And the black co-founder, again, black tech co-founder is very unusual, but he has a real heart for kind of racial reconciliation, right? And so you have a living example of hopefully people, and they're going to have issues, right? They're going to have disagreements, but hopefully the way that they reconcile their disagreements in work is representative of being believers to the team.
Yeah.
And many of our investments, I should say, are straight software as a service, and making a better accounting software, or better mortgage. One of the deals that Russell works with is better mortgage origination software. Well, is that redemptive or not? I do know this. John Posson is very serious about his faith and loving on his employees in a way that points to God.
Yeah.
And so not all of our companies have that type of easy redemptive story to them, but they are all understand that their work is worship.
Yeah, that's great. And Russell, I know you are involved in something I have a long-term passion for, is that of looking at sectors of vocational areas, and in particular you're interested in the emerging and booming tech industry in LA. And Russell has founded a forum called Believers in Tech. So why don't you briefly share people a little bit about what that's about and why you think that's important?
Sure. So when I joined Sovereigns, I was going up to San Francisco a lot more, and just because of the density of San Francisco, so many people working in tech, Henry invited me, there was a couple of Bible studies or just meeting people. It seemed like everyone we ran into was, we ran into a lot of Christians in tech, obviously, but also were involved in Bible studies. And then when I was spending time in LA, I looked around and there were Bible studies, but not Bible studies for people in tech. And I thought, well, this is a little strange. And then I realized I left LA for a long time, but I went to college here. And it's LA's great strength that it's diverse geographically and industry-wide, but also its weakness in trying to create an industry, or industry groups like this, right? And it also leads to, I think, LA's great need, which is for community, right? For people to be desperate to connect. And so we started, basically Believers in Tech has two kind of threads, but the fundamental premise is that community is good and relationship is good. I can't remember if it was Art or Paul mentioned about how relationship is broken after the fall, and relationship's a key element to that. So basically connection by itself is good. In and of itself is good, and you have people who are working. You might be working in a 5-person team and you're one believer, and there's another 5-person team across the street or in a different office at WeWork, but you would never connect to them. It's not working at Boeing or wherever and there's a group. So we have one group is founders that get together once a month for dinner, and another group is basically once a quarter talks for any Christian working in technology. And there are some unique needs. I think sometimes founders can have a little bit of pride, but that's okay. We love all of them in terms of thinking that everything is different. Certainly some things are shared, but there are not a lot of other industries where at 28 I don't know if Quinn's still here and a few people, but I don't know how Quinn's got such good skin. I don't know how old he is, but where let's say at 28 you're trying to raise money You're trying to hire, 5 people. You might have to fire them, and if things go really well, you might have a $10 million check in your pocket, right? There's not a lot of other industries, if any, where you have that. So those are pretty unique. So we think industry sector is pretty helpful in certain areas. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. I invited Art and Paul up here. I wanted them to interact a little bit. I mean, you've been listening to Henry and Russell's stories, and especially with Sovereign's Capital, this whole idea of sponsoring emerging businesses. And if you had any reflections on, first, why is that important to God and our culture today to be doing that work? And then maybe I'll open it for you to even ask them a question or two.
Well, I'll talk about that in a second, but I just wanted to accent something that Henry mentioned and just take it another step. He said that really our goal is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever.
Yes.
And really, the important thing for believers to understand that he said, I just want to take it a step further, is that God's interest is our joy. The way John Piper put it is, we're called to glorify God by enjoying Him forever, and that God is most glorified when we are most satisfied in Him. And my favorite quote from C.S. Lewis underlines this too. It says, "Our Lord finds our desires not too strong but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures fooling around with drink, sex, and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child content to play with mud pies in a slum when he doesn't know what it means to have a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased." And that God's real interest is our joy. And our joy is really, when we focus on the glory of God, it ends up sooner or later in our joy. And I would just wanted to make the distinction there is that there's a difference between selfishness and self-interest. Self-interest is good, selfishness is bad. But everything we do in our faith is in our self-interest. It's the interest of our own joy. It's in the interest of our own flourishing. Like, for instance, you look at what Jesus says, whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will find it. And so when you lose your life, you're not losing everything. You're actually gaining everything that's worth having. You're gaining. And so it really is in your self-interest to lose your life and pick up your cross and follow Him.
Right.
And so that's really, really important to understand that faith in Christ is not just self-denying. There is a self-denial that's to go part of it, but self-denial is in your self-interest. To put it another way, self-denial is in the interest of your own joy eventually.
That was gold. Get the video from this. Rewind it for 3 minutes and just play it over and over.
Yeah. How about you, Paul?
One aspect of that is Romans 12, 1 and 2, which is to present our bodily life to God as a living sacrifice, which is our spiritual worship. My friend Robert Banks made a very shrewd observation in the New Testament. That is, that it never says we go to church or go to the gathering, the ecclesia, to worship. Never says that. Now, when they gathered, they worshiped. Of course they did. But it never says that, because that wasn't the reason, actually, for getting together. The reason for getting together was mutual edification, building one another up. You find it through Thessalonians and elsewhere. So we worship all week long, through our work, through our life, and so on.
Yeah.
I have an interesting question, though, for our entrepreneurial friends here.
Good.
How do you find a spouse that can put up with it?
What's a spouse?
Spouse.
I'm kidding you.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So God, Kimberly is more proof that God loves me and wants me to be happy. I also think that my entrepreneurial success is really advanced through her love and her partnership. And I think that she understands and is not threatened by my work because of the ritual that we have of doing date night or date lunch. for me to be intentional. And in the early days, that was one of the hardest things I could do. Kimberly, you'll meet Kimberly someday, maybe, and she has a different pace. She has a different pace than I do, much slower. And I'd actually have to prepare for date night just like I prepared for a business meeting. You know how you get a really important meeting you can have, prepare, look up their bio, understand what their interests are and all that kind of stuff? It wasn't until I realized that I just actually need to just reflect and meditate and get ready emotionally and spiritually for loving on her really well, that I was able to do it well. And I think she feels honored by that. And our relationship is much stronger because of that. And I couldn't do what I do without her support, no doubt about it. So I don't know if that's the perfect answer to your question. But that's how it
Your
works out.
question was, how do you find the person? For all this, maybe you saw all the
The
singles.
answer is everything is you pray for it. You get down on your knees.
And you beg.
You pray for it. Right? Yeah.
I'll answer. So two kind of aspects, and I think especially touching to me because we have a baby due at the end of the month. So it's another nice kind of landmark. Hey. So my wife and I met in London. We both were USC alums. We met in London. We didn't stay in touch. She moved to Hong Kong. I moved to Hong Kong, and I was kind of dating and not being serious about who I was dating, and I didn't know she was in Hong Kong. And then I prayed after a birthday weekend, and I said, God, I'm tired of just kind of dating random people. I'm ready to settle down. And then like 3 days later, I was on the beach in Hong Kong wearing a USC shirt, and she came up to me and she said, don't I know you from London? And I felt very much that God was just waiting for me to be ready to basically receive his gift. And then she grew up, I grew up in Miami and she grew up in LA. It's a tremendous freeing blessing to have, for me, to have someone who doesn't put any financial pressure. I mean, she wants, of course, to have a house and kind of a solid life, if you will, but she's very happy. She grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Hollywood, and she's very happy just living a simple life, and anything we have above that, it should be done to kind of, because we choose it and because we make intelligent decisions, but not out of pressure to have the nicest car or the nicest thing. And for me as a man, that's a tremendous blessing.
Yeah, that's great.
Just wanted to add one more thing in relationship to your original question about the company. I think the purpose of what I see them doing, and of a lot of companies, is ultimately contribute towards flourishing. Now, originally when I heard that word flourishing, I didn't like it. It sounds like a flower garden or something like that. It's very non-specific. But I think as I started thinking about it, and we focus a lot on it at the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics, that it has to do more with the biblical idea of shalom, which is wholeness, kind of wholeness of not just peace or an absence of conflict, but it's a kind of wholeness within the society, within the city, or wherever it is. And I would say flourishing as shalom in every direction, personal and public. And I think the idea of a company contributing to that in their own individual respect, I can't probably articulate the purpose of your business well enough to really talk about all the different dimensions, but you know, your bandwidth, you're facilitating people's relationships and connections with each other and discussions and that kind of thing, as well as safety and security with a walkie-talkie. And you're not only being able to give away a lot, but it's also in what you do that you're contributing to cultural flourishing. If it's a good product and it's a good in service that really enhances people's lives, which it does, then it contributes to flourishing, the well-being of the city, of the country, of the world, that depending on how extensive you do it. So that's really important, that each one of our companies contributes towards a general flourishing in different respects.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things I thought about too is that reminds me of is the more thoughtful, Christ-following leaders there are in positions of influence and entrepreneurship, the more we have. We talk in our fellows program about the institutions we have in society represent structure, and they're just are. They can be good things and God-ordained things, but they all need direction. And the opportunity to give them direction and to be a voice and a long-term nurturing of exactly that art, flourishing not in the overused sense of the word that you go to all kinds of non-Christian businesses today and they're all about human flourishing. You see that all over LA, on marquees about different kinds of nonprofit groups. People are doing all this kind of work, but when you talk about shalom and you start digging down into what does God mean by flourishing, and you can speak into that well.
Yeah, we have a book called Counting the Cost, Christian Perspectives on Capitalism. And the second chapter is phenomenal. It's by Jonathan Pennington on the biblical view of flourishing.
Yeah, he's great.
Which deals with all of the biblical words in the Old Testament and New Testament that give a distinctively biblical perspective on flourishing.
Right.
That's
Very
worth
good.
a read in itself. It's worth the whole book.
That's
Although
great.
there's a lot of other good things there too, I think.
Yeah, very good. Hey, let's thank our panel today.